in for questions, but don't be afraid to holler them out if you got something. So, talking about storm sewers, kind of a basic overview of the storm sewer system in Duluth, and our flood recovery efforts where we're at so far. Kind of funny story about this picture. Right after the flood, we were just going around the clock looking at damages, trying to figure out what streets were open, what was closed, what was washed out. And I had friends calling and emailing and texting saying, geez, are you alive out there? We heard from you guys. So we were out taking pictures, and I sent a few of them off on email to a few friends. One of them was a forecaster for NOAA, and she posted it on her Facebook, or the NOAA Facebook page. I got back to the office a little bit later, and I sent an email from Julie somebody, and she said, I am Julie with Vice President Al Gore's office. He saw your picture on the NOAA Facebook page. He wants to use it in his presentations. He said, okay, and I said, so I wrote back, and I said, geez, I'd be honored to have Mr. Gore use this photograph on his presentations, but had I known that he was going to use it, I would take it with a real camera and not just my phone. And she wrote back and said she told him that he was excited. So, so a quick overview, talk about my background, kind of where I came from, and a little bit about myself. Talk about Duluth, some of our geography and topography that makes stormwater a challenge. Some basic stormwater things. I'm sure Petey's already covered most of these, but I'll talk about them quick. A little bit about the June flood and the impacts it had on our city, and some of the issues we're facing since the flood in recovery efforts and funding, and some considerations that hopefully you guys with at the end. So, my background, I'm from Ely, Minnesota. You guys know where Ely is? Yeah. Not too far north of here. I grew up there and love the area. I grew up in the outdoors doing canoeing, camping, fishing, all those sorts of things. I was a fishing guide for 14 years, ran my own business out of Ely, up in the Boundary Waters in Aquatico Park. Loved it, developed an appreciation for water quality and protecting those resources. Following the guiding business, I got a degree in water quality management, or what's actually water resources from Vermillion, the college in Ely. Took an internship with the city of Duluth with the water quality program. Loved it, loved the folks I worked with, and I got hired on a few years later after a couple of years of interning, so been very fortunate. I also have a wastewater operator's license through the same program, so I do have a license to do wastewater work. My job as program coordinator, as Katie said, which means I do a lot of meetings, a lot of presentations, a lot of report writing, a lot of office work, but I love it, it's a good job. My main job is MS4 permit compliance. Does anybody know what an MS4 is? It stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. So if you're a public entity like a town or a city or a university, you own a storm sewer that discharges to the water of the state, you probably have an MS4 permit. That permit requires a number of things I'll talk about a little bit later, but it's prevention-oriented, education-oriented. We do have 4 utilities in Duluth: storm sewer, sanitary sewer, drinking water, and natural gas. So I'm involved in any of those 4 utilities, but mostly storm sewers. A little bit about Duluth. We're a long city. We're 26 miles long from Fond du Lac to Lakewood, so we're a very long town, only a few miles wide. We have a steep elevation change of about 883 feet from the top of Thompson Hill in Proctor to the lake, so it's a very, very steep city for the most part. Storm sewer system is very large. We have infrastructure for about 120,000 people. So we have 431 miles of storm sewer pipe, 12,000 catch basins. So all these little catch basins on almost every intersection. Is there a question? See. About 5,600 manholes, which are just for storm sewer, not sanitary sewer manholes or telephone manholes. And on the edges of town, about 100 miles of ditching. So there's a large, very large storm sewer system. And about 3,000 driveway culverts that we maintain. Basic stormwater stuff. Stormwater is only rainwater runoff on the surface of the ground and snow melt. It's not anything else. It's not groundwater, it's not other runoff, it's just rainwater. Impervious surface creates runoff. I'm sure you guys talked about that this morning. The more impervious surface, the more runoff. So bigger property, bigger parking lots produce more runoff. Stormwater itself is usually not polluted. The rainwater is pretty clean, the snow melt's pretty clean. It's the stuff it picks up along the way that's the pollution, whether it's gravel and sand on the roadways, salt, litter, cigarette butts, things like that. That's the pollution. It's not the stormwater itself. It's the things that it carries along and picks up. So we try to reduce those things like salt or gravel we put out in the wintertime to the max. Well, what's this? What does MEP stand for? Any ideas? Like a quiz? MEP is close, maximum extent practicable. That's a term from our MS4 permit. We realize you can't prevent everything all the time, but do the best you can, reduce that pollution to the maximum extent practicable. Okay, so stormwater is not treated. The MS4 requires a series of best management practices and what we call MCMs, a minimum control measure. There's 6 of them. Basically, they cover education and training. We have to educate the public about things they can do to reduce stormwater pollution. Not over-fertilizing, not putting their grass clippings in the street, pick up after your dog, things like that. Training for our employees so that our employees are not polluting stormwater, and also if they spot pollution, what to do about it. Illicit discharge is important for us. Andy, what that is? Anybody? Illicit discharge?
Illegal dumping?
Illegal dumping is very, very good. It's anything that goes in the storm sewer that's not stormwater. So if you have dumping of waste oil, of hydraulic fluid, of construction site, muddy water, anything like that, that's illicit discharge. So we try to spot those and correct them right away. We inspect construction sites in town, whether we permit them or the MPC with large permits them. We inspect construction sites daily in some cases. We also have a series of BMPs. What's a BMP?
Best management
Practice. Those can be things like ponds, grassy swales, sediment basins, big concrete boxes that are as big as this room that stormwater flows into on one end and flows out of on the other end. Those drop out the sediment, the gravel and sand. We can come by and scoop it out later. We inspect those and maintain them. BMPs are also things that are non-structural, things that we do like washing our dump trucks and our vehicles in a wash bay where the water is collected, training our employees, posting no dumping signs. Those are non-structural BMPs, things that we do. And good housekeeping are along the same lines, things that the city does to reduce our impact on stormwater. Make sense so far? All right. So our stormwater program focused heavily on illicit discharge. Any idea why?
Most toxic.
It's toxic. Toxic to what? Lake Superior and fish. Any idea how many trout streams we have in Duluth? 43 streams, but how many are trout streams?
26.
12 is close.
16.
16.
So how many total?
Wait, you've heard the talk
We have-
before.
We
But I
have
remember
16
it.
trout streams.
Out of how many total?
Well, it's 43 or 44 named, depends how you count them. And there's a couple east and west branches of like Amity and Chester, so there's like 13 named and 16 streams. So, but a lot of very good, high quality water in Duluth. Are trout sensitive? Yeah, they're sensitive to temperature changes, to sediment, to muddy water. So we're very careful to discharge anything that could hurt the trout. For example, this is Amity Creek off 7 Bridges Road. We have a storm sewer inlet that comes out. It's dumping, well, it's back in the woods a ways, but it was cutting on the slope of that little tributary and adding muddy water. So we're trying to identify those and correct them whenever possible. Also, illicit discharge, we also are careful of temperature. Why temperature? Oxygen, also what else? Spawning, but too warm of water is lethal for trout. So we're very careful to not discharge too hot of water in trout streams because if they get too much warm water for too long, it can kill them. So, also, I guess, off track a little bit, BMP is structural and non-structural talked about. And, Duluth's on a hillside, so there's always somebody above or below somebody else. There's always a runoff or an erosion issue. One neighbor's raised another one, so that's a big project. storm sewer utility, we have storm sewer fee. It's about $6 a month, so pretty small. But we bill based on impervious surface. So if it's a residential unit, single family, you pay $6 a month or $6.08. But commercial properties are billed based on square footage of impervious surface. So the bigger properties, the more square footage, the more you pay. It's pretty simple, but there's a few adjustments in there too. We're always cleaning our storm sewer. We have 4 of these. They're hydraulic rotters. We call them Vectors, is the brand. On the front, it's a high pressure nozzle that runs down the sewer line, and then you turn the jets on, we pull it back, so it cleans the storm sewers out. We inspect them with TV cameras, mount on little carts that drive down the sewer line and look up at the pipes and inspect them. We do the maintenance. We have a crew that's always out everyday fixing catch basins, leaking ditches, doing culverts, things like that. We review site plans when there's a development project. Anything over 10,000 square feet is reviewed by our engineers for proper drainage and connection to storm sewers. And we offer assistance to homeowners if they're having issues with runoff or run-on or pollution things. So, questions so far? Yes?
Does this slow down in the winter for you guys?
Yeah, sort of, yes. It's more of a time to catch up and plan for the next year. If we do that education, the talks to schools and groups and things like that in the wintertime, because in the summertime we're out inspecting sites and looking at our system and things like that. So I wouldn't say it slows down, but it definitely shifts. So challenges in Duluth. The hillside, a very steep hillside, is a huge challenge for us. In stormwater world, you want to capture stormwater, slow it down, infiltrate it. On the hillside, it's a big challenge. Clay soils also make it difficult to infiltrate. In some cities, the soils are very good. You can infiltrate water slowly at a certain rate. In the clay on the hillside, it's very difficult. So up on top of the hill, where it's flatter and there's more wetlands, we try to infiltrate if we can. Once it breaks the crest, basically below skyline, it's kind of just controlling it as it goes down the hill. Also, shallow bedrock in a lot of places they're just physically, no matter what type of soil is there, you just couldn't put very much water in the ground. So a challenge, but not impossible. This is Coffee Creek. I took that picture a couple weeks ago. Actually, the big one in the back is about 1 foot long. It's a nice sized fish. And that stream's only about 8 feet wide, so very small.
What? Can you see that?
There's just 3 of them. 1, 2, 3. Very exciting. That's on Coffee Creek, right below Arlington Road, above the golf course, if you're that way. So again, 16 trout streams. The trout are very sensitive to pollution of any type, whether it's sediment, temperature, connectivity from too much salt in the wintertime, so we're careful about that as well. We work with the DNR, very closely. The DNR manages the streams, we manage the infrastructure and the property around it, so it's, if we have a maintenance project, if there's a culvert or a bridge with sediment built up underneath it, we want to take some of that out, but the DNR wants to keep it in some cases because it's nice for fish and good for habitat, so we work with them on a project-by-project basis to make sure that we don't disturb habitat. Fish passage is important too. If we have a culvert along a trout stream, that could be a barrier to fish. So if we replace an old culvert, we're often putting in a new one with fish passage capabilities. That could be little riffles inside a culvert, or we've actually bolted rocks to the bottom to create a riffle. It sounds kind of silly, but it's important for fish to be able to get through that culvert on high flow. Challenges, budget's very tight for us. We have about a $4.5 million budget per year, which is a fair amount of money, but by the time you pay overhead and staff and salaries and capital equipment, there's about $1 million left a year for projects, which is some money, but can you guess how much one big, deep culvert replacement could cost? Give me $1 million. So one good washout can soak up a whole year's budget. So there's not enough money to go around, but we do the best we can. We prioritize things. Our system is very old. We have we have pipe dates back to the 1880s. We have a lot of brick arch sewers downtown that are 130 years old. A few years ago, we pulled out some wooden pipe by the KFC on Central Avenue. There's actually like those old barrels you see with the boards. It was actually pretty good shape too. So, but yeah, very old system.
We got a question.
Yes,
How effective are wooden pipes?
they're fine. They just don't last as long as a concrete would, but they work. Yeah.
Well, they last pretty long.
Yeah.
Yeah, it had been there for probably 80 years, 100 years, so it can work very well. It just, it does rot over time. But I know in the rural parts of the state, they use wooden pipes on like farming, road crossings, so yeah, it's not uncommon. Increasing regulations are a challenge for us. They're a good thing, but they're a challenge. The MS4 permit is being reissued, that municipal separate storm sewer system permit. That's coming out in a few months. It has additional regulations for documenting inspections and prioritizing things. And it's all good stuff, but the more that we're required to do in the office, that's less and less resources to do in the field. So it's a challenge for us. TMDL, maybe what that is? Anybody?
Total maximum daily load.
Total maximum daily load.
It's like how much you could eat without gaining weight.
That's actually a good way to put it, yeah. A TMDL, in a nutshell, is the maximum amount of pollutant a single water body can take and still meet water quality standards. So it's very resource specific. If you have a lake, you can dump in, so many pounds of sediment in the lake's okay. At some point, you dump more and more and more, that lake becomes impaired. So we have a TMDL for temperature on Miller Creek in the middle of Duluth. So the stream is too warm. So as this is developing, you only discharge so much heat to the stream, which is a good thing, but it's more documenting, more BMPs, more maintenance. So it's a very good thing, but it's a requirement. Non-degradation is another rulemaking and review set that's coming several years down the line, but that's another layer of reviews. Just a quick minute about the sanitary sewer. It's kind of the dirty cousin of the storm sewer. We have an I&I program. Any guess what I&I stands for? We love acronyms.
Inflow and infiltration?
Yes, inflow infiltration. Excellent. Inflow infiltration are when clean water gets into the sanitary sewer through a crack or a leak or illegal connection. So the sanitary sewer is made for just wastewater from your toilet, your sink, your shower. If those pipes are old and leaking and clean water is coming in, on a heavy rain, that clean water from the ground can overwhelm the treatment plant, and we have sewage overflows. So the storm sewer needs to be just tight and just for wastewater. The FOG program is the I&I program. We go through, inspect our system, eliminate illegal connections or leaks or things like that. Yes.
I gotta put in a plug for where I learned that. St. Louis County, open, I don't know if it's open space, but their downtown office, and they leave these brochures around.
Yeah.
And I learned it because I'm living in an old house with a sump pump.
Okay.
And they actually have a brochure about sump pumps, and it explains all that I&I stuff.
Sure. Yep.
If I hadn't read that, I wouldn't have a clue.
Okay. Yeah, that's from our department also. We put in some pumps to take foundation drain connections that used to be plumbed into the sanitary sewer and pump them with a sump pump outside of the yard. So the FOG program. What does FOG stand for? Anybody? It's like a quiz. FOG is fats, oils, and grease. Why would fats, oils, and grease be a problem in the sanitary sewer? Exactly like your arteries, yeah. This is an 8-inch sanitary sewer. This is a connection from a restaurant that comes in. That's grease built up, so they've been dumping, probably not lots, but over time a little bit here and there, in the sewer. But that plugs up that line over time. The problem is it doesn't plug up their line, it plugs up the guys above them. So
Is that taken from inside the pipe?
that's inside the pipe, with those little cameras with the lights that drive them down. So in some areas down at Canal Park, we have to clean that system and inspect it constantly because there's so much grease we're in the restaurants almost weekly talking to them, but they're still getting some down there, so.
Excuse me,
That's-
what,
yes.
doesn't Duluth have, like, I know most cities, I thought most cities had an ordinance where you had to put in a grease trap and
Yep.
reroute it to one of those big things that the companies pick up?
Yep.
And
Yeah, we
it
do that.
still- It still clogs up that much? Even with
Yes.
that trap?
It's better, we're making progress, but there's room for improvement. Most of the big stuff, like when they empty their fryers out, that goes to those collection bins, and they actually get paid to get that waste taken care of. But it's like when they're scraping off plates and a little bit of dressing, it's just a little bit over time with hundreds of plates each night, that's what builds up. It's not so much the big dumps.
Oh, okay.
So garbage disposals, you're
Garbage
saying
disposals are the worst thing ever for a sewer. Because it encourages you to put down like salad and little bits of stuff, so all that stuff doesn't flow, it clogs.
That's good to
But
know.
on a residential property, there's not enough volume to make a big difference, so usually you can flush through. Just briefly about the consent decree. Anybody heard of that before? The consent decree is just an agreement between the city of Duluth, the Western Lake Superior Sanitary District, and the US EPA to stop sanitary sewer overflows. So it's like a roadmap for us to follow with use of I&I work to build big storage basins. You know, at Canal Park, you may have seen that big tank they're constructing. It's 8 million gallons. We have 6 of those across town, ranging from 500,000 to 8 million gallons. There's work plans and milestones, a lot of report writing, tracking, but it's a plan for us to stop the sewer overflows by 2016. So that's another program. There's a quick graph showing kind of the average rainfall on this line over the past 12 years or so, and the average flow in our sanitary sewer from about 20 million gallons in 2000 to what this were to today, it's about 11 million gallons. So we've cut our flows almost in half by going through taking out the I&I. So whenever there's a groundwater leaking in, we're fixing those, so it's only for wastewater. Make sense? Yes?
Right. Does that significantly change then the number of people you have to hire every year? Because you're hiring less people to go and like do kind of emergency work?
Good question. No, not really. There's still the same. The sewer's the same size, so we're still doing the maintenance on it, and the system is still 400 some miles long, so we're always fixing it. But there's less flow, so there's less. We pay for less treatment to the district. But a good question. So, storm sewer questions. Any thoughts about storm sewer, sanitary sewers?
What is the gallon, I don't understand the green.
Oh, actually, yep, that's gallons overflow, so, that's millions of gallons, so back in '01, we had a bad year, it was about 7 million gallons that we overflowed, raw sewage. It's been going down ever since. When I first started in '07, we had a bad storm, but otherwise, we're down. We've had, aside from the flood, we didn't have an overflow for about 2 years. So, we've made progress, a lot of progress, yes.
We need to clean out the sewers and basins that are used to collect sediment
Yes.
and catch it. Where's all that go?
We test it. If it tests clean for heavy metals, we landfill it, or use it for a fill site if they're building a home or a soccer field, we use it for that. If there's contaminants, we'll landfill it. Good question. Okay, so the flood. This is on June 19, 2021. We had anywhere from 6 to about 11 inches of rain. I think the 24-hour official number was like 6.9 inches, I think. Does that make sense? Anybody else heard differently? I think it was 6.9 inches. The 500-year probability was like 5.7 inches, so we actually are between a 500-year and a 1,000-year probability, so it was a very rare storm. We had damage to infrastructure, both public and private. Most of the big damage was near those main drainages, the trout streams, larger stream segments. So there was the railroad had some crossings that were washed out. The city had some big pipes that were washed out. There was major damage to roads, bridges, storm sewers, all kinds of stuff. Right after the flood, the main concern was natural gas lines, because as hillsides washed away or as the ground moved, those gas lines would get tugged, and the joints, it's plastic pipes, the joints would get tugged loose. So that was the first concern. There was debris, and typically with the flood, the debris is like like a muddy or silty, stuff. It's not big stuff, but for us it was a lot of rocks and trees because of the hillside. Not just little rocks, when big rocks got moved down the hill. So getting rid of those is a huge problem for us. Restoration efforts are a big challenge because you're not just putting back a culvert, but you're restoring the area around it, the road, the embankments, and rip-wrapping it or armoring it so that it'll next time. That's a big challenge as well. Funding is important. FEMA's been involved from the start, but they reimburse a percentage of a percentage, so it's not like you get the full brand new street and the whole thing. You get a percentage of what was damaged. So funding's an issue for us. We're on money. Got some pictures just of random damages. This is Merritt Creek near about 37th Avenue West. Double barrel culvert just washed out, gravel alley. The roads are very easily. That's off of Westgate where that first picture show was. That made a lot of, national news, I think. One thing that we come up here, and some of these blacktop chunks, they're hanging 8 or 10 feet off into the air. There's nothing under here, or under there. These folks will go right to the edge and stand there and look, and we're like, guys, get back, It's pretty scary. Yeah,
Chris, what are the pipes? that
Oh,
we
yep.
see?
These are water lines. Those steel lines are water lines. Orange natural gas. It's a 2-inch gas main feeder.
Did that break, that gas line?
Yeah, it broke. Yep. It's capped off right here.
Is that what's happened, do you think, is that the kind of action that causes, do you think, the fires in Rockaway in that area?
Oh, in New York?
Yeah.
Probably. Probably gas electrical, yeah. This is 63rd Avenue East or West. King Creek runs kind of across like this, but again, it just overtopped, plowed with brush and overtopped, took the sidewalk and the boulevard. It undermined enough that we had to replace the culverts, the whole road bed, the sidewalk. It's not just a matter of putting some dirt back and pouring a new sidewalk, it's a whole full restoration.
Is that a box culvert?
Yep, it's a concrete box, I think it's a 6x6. Same area, just a different kind of angle. This is Bristol Street and 63rd is over here. I think it's up on, I'm not even sure. Part of the problem was that back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, we were saving money and using this corrugated metal pipe, which was very cheap. We still use a little bit, but the bigger stuff rots out over time. So when these culverts were took that heavy flow, you'd see these ends were half rotten. They'd fold up and then totally blocks, and then the whole road goes. The pipe may have been able to handle most of the flow, but once it started collapsing, it's like a pop can. That's a gas line as well, with the tracer wire. That's behind the Whole Foods Co-op. Anybody see that when it happened? Yeah.
That was scary.
Yes, that's Brewer Creek that goes underneath that. Yeah, it's an urbanized stream, a long tunnel with, over time Duluth was built, built, so the pipe it's old, newer, and those joints where it transitioned from newer to older weren't always smooth, so I think that water must have come roaring down there, and those transitions weren't able to pass the flow very well, so that's when that pipe burst. So a few more site-specific stuff. I was on mission this morning, that's why I just got here kind of late. This is kind of an oddball stream in Duluth because the watershed is it's a big watershed, but the banks are generally clay and very steep, whereas most of our streams are steep but bedrock or just a little bit more of a channelized. This is real wide and broad, so when it flooded, it cut those banks back a long, long ways. There's a car over there. You can see this is 200 feet across and 10 feet deep, so it's It's a major washout. Hillsides, those big clay banks just sloughed, they sloughed into the stream, debris carried away. I'm gonna go kind of fast, we're going to time here. Woody debris in the stream is a big issue. In some cases, DNR wants to keep it because it's good for fish habitat, but it's, potentially could clog bridges or culverts downstream. So, in most cases, we're leaving the debris in place, with woody material, but in some cases, we're taking it out where it's right in front of it, or upstream of the culvert. These are, this is in Mission, these are Jersey barriers that you see between like lanes that when they're doing highway work. So those are 10 feet long and 3 feet tall, so they're weigh 1,000 pounds, and they got blowing down like nothing. Pretty fast. This is hard to see, it's a debris catcher. MnDOT put that in, I think back in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, to catch woody debris before it got to the bridge on County 23. It worked. It caught trees for a long time and held them back, and then finally, when overwhelmed, the stream cut. It's hard to see, but it cut a brand new path along the side. So, these debris catchers, we have a few of them in town. They do work, but if they work too well and not maintained, they clog and the stream goes. That's Mission also, just a real wide cut. This is in the neighborhood near Fond du Lac. This house is just off the screen here. Steep hillsides, the stream's kind of in a tough little channel here.
I'll give you a 5-minute warning.
Yep, okay, I'm fast. Below Highway 23, this is Jacob is up in this area. Sediment and debris in the channel. Miller Creek is a big one for us. This is at the bottom of Lincoln Park. Rock and debris got pushed down the hillside into the park area. There's an old WPA wall. You can kind of see where it should be, right along the sides here. But it's 3 feet tall, so the channel is 3 feet deep at least, and that's all filled with rock over here. So that's it's a challenge working with DNR to get some of that taken out and leave some of it in place. More pictures. These are big rocks, but those are not softballs. Those are beach balls. More Miller Creek pictures. There's the old remnants of the wall right here. You can kind of see. Same kind of thing. It's in place on this side, but this side got blown out. Chester Creek. There's a couple of dams that were old and sort of, I say failing, but they weren't functioning real well. They got beat up pretty bad. We'll probably do a restoration that includes some sort of a channel for fish to get around the dam. The dam was a barrier to fish in the past. There's a better picture of it, but not quite sure yet. That's Upper Chester. Just a lot of gravel and stuff in the stream. This is Chester above Superior Street. There's just culvert crossing that have trees and rock right in front of them, so that's going to be a challenge. We're going to take it out before spring runoff, but that's it's a potential clogging. This is Chester also. Tisher Creek, same kind of thing as Trout Stream that goes through Woodland, kind of by UMD. Double box culvert. This is low flow, this is high flow. The high flow, 3 minutes? Okay, go faster. Stewart Creek out west, same kind of thing. King Creek, West Duluth. All the exposed soils discharging sediment through the streams, so we've got muddy water. Kingsbury goes to the zoo. That's in the zoo area. Same kind of thing, channelized with those WPA rock walls filled with sediment. Those should be 3 or 4 feet deep, but they're full.
How full were they before the flood?
Uh,
Or was it?
No, it was down a couple, 2 or 3 feet. So there was some debris there, but it was over the channel. That's Kingsbury during the flood. It's a raging river. That's the polar bear exhibit. The high water mark is actually up in here. This is later. And for reference, there's the polar bear not during the flood. He swam out. I mean,
He just floated out, I heard.
Yeah, it was up that high. So. Go on quick. Summation we're facing is the system undersized. In some cases, yes, because it was built, long ago before there was development upstream, so in some cases, yes, but it's not made to handle a 500-year event either. Under-maintained, in some cases, yeah, we should have done more maintenance to keep those pipes wide open and clear and ready, but, with a small budget, it's not always possible. Public-private drainage, we have culverts that cross city property and private land. We can maintain the city part, but not the private part, so we're trying to get easements now to make sure we can maintain the whole thing. Properties designed with drainage in mind, it's easy to make your property discharge water really well, but not tying with all the other stuff around it. Debris is an issue, the wood debris, the rocks, the mud, that's a huge problem for us. Finishing up, we have FEMA applications for infrastructure, roads, bridges, culverts. Minnesota Recovers, I have $12.2 million in applications to the state for recovery efforts. Should hear back on that soon. NRCS is Natural Resources Conservation Service. They're involved for, a couple $1 million to applications anyway. We have about $500,000 to DNR for debris removal also. Possibly in the future, Great Lakes Restoration, the Fish and Wildlife, Coastal Program, or the Lessard Outdoor Heritage Council could be involved also, but we're working on the big ones first, the state of Minnesota and FEMA first. Kind of last slide, just going forward, we want stakeholder input, we want, your input, public's input, agencies, groups, to give us direction as to what we want to see and what we don't want to see. Funding's important, we can't fix all this stuff ourselves, we gotta get money from the state or from the federal government. Balancing needs and uses, so that's making sure the trout have a place to live, as well as we have trails and parks and things like that as well. Storm was rare. Hopefully we won't be number one for the next 500 years, but we never know. And this is going to be a multi-year, long recovery, so. I know that last part went kind of fast, sorry about that. Other questions or thoughts or comments, or